Tehran ignoring pleas for calm from President Hassan Rouhani. Iranian protesters took to the streets in several cities for the fifth day on Monday as pent-up economic and political frustrations boiled over in the broadest display of discontent in years. The Iranian government responded with conciliatory words from Mr. Rouhani, but also a widening security clampdown and a pledge late Monday to crack down even harder. The government will not allow an insecure situation to continue in Tehran. Brig. Gen. Esmail Kawsari, Deputy Chief of the main Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps base in Tehran, told the semi-official ISNA news agency. If this situation continues, the officials will definitely make some decisions, and at that point this business will be finished. Despite Mr. Rouhani's diplomatic language, it was clear the demonstrators would be given no leeway. The Deputy Interior Minister, Hossein Zolfagari, told the semi-official Jamaran website, "From tonight the unrest will be controlled more seriously." On Monday, a crackdown by the government and security services was building, and riot police officers with water cannons were out in full force in Tehran, the capital. The death toll from the clashes was up to at least 21. And in the central province of Esfahan, one police officer was reported killed and 3 wounded in a gunfight. An agitator exploited the current situation, and using a hunting rifle, opened fire on police forces. State television reported 6 protesters were killed and 3 policemen injured Monday night as protesters sought to seize the police station in Qadarajan in Esfahan province. State News Radio reported on Tuesday. Elsewhere in Esfahan, state radio also reported the killing of an 11-year-old child and a 20-year-old by rioters in Khomeini Shar and the death of a member of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps in an attack on a police station in Karai-Sang. In all, about 450 people have been arrested in Tehran alone since the protests began on Saturday, the semi-official news agency ILNA reported, citing Ali Asghar Nazarbakht, the political security deputy for the Tehran governor's office. There were also arrests in provincial towns. Mr. Rouhani has urged demonstrators to avoid violence but defended their right to protest. He did so again on Monday on Twitter. "People want to talk about economic problems, corruption, and lack of transparency in the function of some of the organs and want the atmosphere to be more open," he wrote. "The requests and demands of the people should be taken note of." President Trump weighed in on Twitter on Monday, saying that the Iranian people have been repressed for many years. "They are hungry for food and for freedom," Mr. Trump wrote. "Along with human rights, the wealth of Iran is being looted. Time for change." The protests are not just the largest in Iran since 2009. They also suggest a rejiggering of some traditional divisions. People who live in rural provinces, long viewed as supporters of the authorities, are now leading most of the demonstrations. And while people in Tehran have also taken to the street, the capital is not the center of the protests, as it was during the so-called Green Movement in 2009. In Tehran, many middle-class Iranians share the discontent but also fear insecurity. The frustrations that led to the protests also appear different from the sentiments in 2009. That year, a wave of demonstrations broke out after the contested election of a hardline president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and then turned into a wider protest movement against Iran's leaders. This time, it is the failure of President Rouhani, a moderate, to deliver greater political changes and economic opportunity. Despite the lifting of some of the sanctions against Iran as part of the nuclear deal, young people are especially angry. The average age of those arrested is under 25, one official said. The poor economy especially affects Iran's young people. More than 50% of the population is under 30, according to official statistics. Officially, youth unemployment is near 20%, but experts say it is really closer to 40%. When the protests started last Thursday in the city of Mashhad, demonstrators chanted slogans about the weak economy. But as the protests spread, they have taken on a far more political cast. Increasingly, they are being directed at Iran's entire political establishment. Some demonstrators have even called for the death of Mr. Rouhani and of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khomeini. The strength and volatility of the protests have caught Iranian politicians by surprise. Some have denounced them as riots, while others have acknowledged that the widespread frustrations at their root can no longer be ignored. On Monday in Tehran, the atmosphere was tense and security forces were out in large numbers. Protests occurred sporadically, with people shouting slogans and leaving. The day before, protesters in provincial towns tried to storm police stations, military and installations, and also attacked a seminary, state television reported, showing footage of burned cars and fires. Protests have taken place in at least half a dozen cities, including Karaj, Kashvan, Qamshar, Darud, and Taiz Erkan, it said. Access to the Telegram messaging app and the Instagram photo and video sharing app continued to be blocked by the authorities, cutting off the main communication tool for protesters. Special software used to circumvent the government filters could still be downloaded easily. And on Monday, as on other days, there were calls for protests online and on foreign-based Persian-language satellite channels. Some residents said they were determined to continue the demonstrations, and several hundred gathered at central squares. While the number of protesters in Tehran was small on Monday, the discontent was widespread. Many people on the streets complained about high prices, corruption, and lack of change. We need to improve our economy, and the people's voices must be heard, said a 28-year-old woman, a piano teacher in Tehran, who asked not to be named out of fear of repercussions. I'll go out tonight again. Many youths in larger cities enthusiastically voted for Mr. Rouhani when he was re-elected in May, raising expectations among many in the reform camp. But since then even many of the president's supporters say he has failed to fulfill his promises for improving an economy sorely hobbled by years of sanctions, corruption and mismanagement. Even the lifting of economic sanctions under Iran's 2015 nuclear deal with large foreign powers including the United States has not unleashed the growth Mr. Rouhani had hoped for, as key sectors of the economy remain under the thumb of obscure powers, including religious foundations and the country's Revolutionary Guards. There is mismanagement and widespread corruption in all levels of the state apparatus. Beyond that, the United States has continued other sanctions, making it still harder for Mr. Rouhani to make gains. The economic frustrations do not appear to have been offset by the greater social freedoms that the president has granted young people. Under Mr. Rouhani, strict Islamic rules have been somewhat relaxed. Concerts have been allowed, and the morals police are largely off the streets. Illegal parties are usually no longer raided, although there have been exceptions. But there is a wide gap between Iran's changing and modernizing society and Iranian leaders who insist on keeping up their anti-Western policies and the state interpretation of Islam. Mr. Rouhani's decision not to include any women in his cabinet and his failure to put the relaxation of the rules into law have made many bitter. The president has complained that power centers dominated by hardliners have blocked many of his plans and decisions. Now some protesters are venting their frustrations at the political and clerical establishment. In Takistan, west of Tehran, several people were arrested after attacking a seminary, the Iranian news media reported. In Karaj, also close to Tehran, a gas station was burned, a witness reported. Earlier on Monday, ILNA quoted Hidayatollah Kadhimi, a representative for the town of Izet, in Iran's oil-rich but poor Khuzestan region, as saying 2 people had died there on Sunday night. He said the cause of death was not immediately known. State television announced that 10 people had died on Sunday, but did not provide a location. Some armed protesters tried to take over some police stations and military bases but faced serious resistance from security forces, a presenter said. Illegal protests continued last night in several cities with less protesters participating, but they were as violent and turbulent, making residents of these cities concerned about their and their businesses' security, the state television report said. The videos showed burned cars, fires, and wreckage on the pavement. The report also showed a fire brigade vehicle that was said to have been seized by protesters in Darud, Lorestan province. By Monday evening, riot police officers belonging to the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps waited in an alley near Tehran's city theater for a potential protest to start, as men and women anxiously walked the sidewalks. Others, families and couples, cruised around the area in cars. Many were young people. They want to start, but there is too many police, one taxi driver said, looking at hundreds of people, and even more security forces. Plainclothes officers on motorcycles zipped by. Buses stood ready to take potential troublemakers into custody.